We get prepared to a very provocative speech. Why current people practices won't work anymore. Why we need an alternative approach to HR. Here with us today, the highly renowned Lucy Adams. Big applause to you. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Hi.
Lucy worked as HR director of the well-known BBC.
Yep.
And now she's CEO of her own company, Disruptive HR, here from London, in Roost. Do you like it here, by the way?
I love it here. It's beautiful. A bit cold.
Yeah. Working weather conditions, so to say. So this is your stage. We're very happy to listen to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start with an apology because I can't speak German. I learnt it at school. I'm just going to move this away a little bit. That's a bit better. I learnt it at school, but that is a long, long time ago. So I'm one of those stupid English people that can only speak English. And so I've spent the last hour and a half Bernard has been very kindly translating for me every so often, so I now know the word for stork in German, Storch, and I'm really sorry that I didn't understand what Margaret was saying, because I was really interested in hearing what you'd got to say and some of the things that you're doing. And I just also want to say thank you for inviting me to this conference. It's I hear great things about it, and you've made me so welcome, and the organisation has been so wonderful. And whenever I go, whenever I travel to conferences all over the world, I always guarantee to meet somebody really, really interesting. Usually it's at the conference, but I actually met somebody last night on the way from the airport, and that's the gentleman standing by the door, Valdemar, who you are going to hear from later on. And we shared an hour-long taxi drive back to the hotel together. And as he will share with you later, he is actually runs a company which does vegan condoms. Yeah, vegan condoms. So unusually...
They're already here. Yeah.
Unusually, when I gave him my business cards, he gave me a packet of condoms. And so I now have to explain to my husband when I get home why I've got a packet of condoms in my suitcase, which is going to be interesting. That's going to be interesting. So... we've got about 40 minutes, and I've got a lot that I want to share with you. I want to talk about why I feel HR is just not equipped for a disrupted world, for the volatile world that Margaret was explaining about. But I'm not going to do it like, you know, when you go to those conferences and people stand up and tell you that you're rubbish. And I've been to conferences all my life as an HR professional, and people have told me that I'm rubbish and I'm not doing it properly. So everything that I'm going to criticize, I have done myself. So this is not a higher moral ground speech at all. Everything that I've done, I have criticized myself. So I want to share why, but I more importantly want to give you some ideas and thoughts and practical tools that you can take away. Because I'm not a researcher, I'm not an academic, I'm not a theoretical person, I'm a practitioner. I'm just going to take my earrings off because they are rattling like hell, and that's going to be really frustrating for you. So I'm going to start with the BBC because it's my story. And we've only got our own stories, haven't we? But I'm going to share some of the changes and the issues that we had, and they will not be unique to the BBC. You will each have your own story of volatility and agility and pace of change. Every single one of you will have your own story. But I'm going to share mine because I want to kind of illustrate why I feel HR is no longer fit for purpose. So I was with the BBC for 5 years, head of HR and also for head of internal communications. And it was an amazing experience. 5 years, got to go and do some most incredible things with the BBC during an immensely exciting time, but also some very difficult challenges that we were going through, as each one of you will be going through with your business. So we had just this disruption of this technology, the new wave of disruptive technologies impacting our business. So used to be, if you lived in the UK and you wanted to watch television, your favourite programme, you could choose between BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. That was it. That was your choice. I picked up my daughter. She'd been travelling for a year, and one of the first things she says to me at the airport is, oh, hi, Mum, here's the washing, and have I got Netflix in my room because I want to binge watch Vampire Diaries Season 2 all weekend. It's completely different how we consume media. So we binge watch. I won't start watching a drama unless I know I can watch the whole thing in one go if I want to. We dual screen, so we don't just want to watch a program or listen to a radio show. We want to communicate about it. We want to message each other about it. We want to take part in it. We want to send our own content in to see it on the screen. We consume media in completely different ways. And so at the BBC, we had to change the way that we delivered media, how we scheduled it, how we produced it, how we distributed it. Different skills, different technology, people having to embrace new business models and create new business models. Scary times. We had new competition. How many of you have got Netflix? I see a show of hands. Do you have Amazon Prime here yet? Yeah, so a few of you have got Amazon Prime as well. I can remember sitting in the boardroom when we discussed the fact that Amazon were going into original content. And I remember thinking, you know, we laughed. What are they going to do? Amazon, an online retailer producing television programs. We thought, are they going to do a shopping channel? And of course now they're producing fantastic drama. The competition can come so fast from places you least expect it. So, new competition, having to think about who you work against, but also who you work with. So we had to collaborate far more, and you will have your own needs to collaborate, possibly to save money. So you get teams to join up and do it for cheaper, but also because, in our case, audiences, in your case, maybe customers or consumers, they don't care where it comes from. They just want the best possible experience. Have any of you been to Glastonbury in the UK? Yeah, maybe a couple of you. So it's a big music festival. It's the biggest music festival in the UK. 125,000 people go. Major, major event. If you'd have gone to Glastonbury 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you would have seen from the BBC a team from Radio 1, there would have been a team from Radio 2, a team from BBC 3, there would have been the online team, there would have been the local news team, the national news team, all fighting for resources, all trying to get interviews with the stars, all protecting their budgets. The first year that we sent one BBC team to Glastonbury, with all of those teams coming together and collaborating, we increased viewing and listening across all devices by 77%. Audiences don't care where it comes from, but we find it so hard to get collaboration going and getting teams working together. We don't even want to work with the team next door, let alone another department or another division or a team that was working across in another country. So we're trying to get people to work with new technologies, new business models, with new competition, to collaborate in different ways. So I'm worrying about this mic. Yeah, it's kind of...
Would you prefer this one?
I wouldn't, because I wave my arms about so much. I think that's better. I think what was happening, it was pulling down. There we go. I think we'll probably be all right now. I think we'll be okay. Oh, yeah, that's better, isn't it? I was kind of being gradually strangled as... Right, we're good, we're good. So, asking so much of the people that work for us. And we're asking them to be more productive, to do more for less. At the BBC, we had to take £700 million off the cost base. £700 million per year. And we did that by cutting corners and having maybe 3 producers where we'd have had 4 producers in the past. But we also did it by tackling some of the traditional legacy terms and conditions, that sense of entitlement that people have had for years. So the final salary pension scheme went. Compulsory redundancies for the first time in the BBC's history. Inflation plus pay rises went as a matter of right. All of these things that people believed were their entitlement. They'd worked for the BBC for 20, 30 years, and this is what they'd always had. And the very parental nature of that contract was damaged. And it led to huge anger. We had strikes, we had so much resentment and anger and hostility. We had the rise of social media, increased public and political scrutiny. We had major crises. We had the gig economy, 20,000 people on the staff, but 60,000 freelancers work for the BBC. And how do you manage that? We had the millennials, and we had the increasingly larger numbers of older people who didn't want to give up work, because chances are they might live to 100. And who wants to spend 40 years of your life in retirement watching daytime TV? Of course they don't. So you're trying to manage the most multi-generational workforce in history. Pace of change. We're asking them to do so much more with less, with different people, with new technology, using different skills. And what have we got to help us do this? The HR manual. This book that was written in 1970, that has been updated a little bit with new terminology, that tells us if you want to increase performance, you do performance management reviews. If you want to increase engagement, you do an annual engagement survey, and you cascade action plans through the organization. And if you want to look at potential and talent pipeline, you'd create a 9-box grid and you put all your people in the 9-box grid. And I got to a point where I just thought, I cannot connect what I'm trying to do for this organization and trying to help this organization through with these processes and these policies and this mindset. It's just not working. So I wanted to find, were there different ways of doing things? Could we fundamentally change the nature of what we do in HR to make it fit for a disrupted world, to equip our organizations and our leaders and our people to really help them think through and equip them with the skills and the mindsets and the attitudes that they need? And I think we can. But it's not going to be through tinkering with our processes. It's not going to be through changing our ratings in our performance management review from 5 boxes to 3 or 4, or calling it something slightly different. It's going to come through a fundamental rethink about our relationship to our organization, to our leaders, to our managers, to our people, and how they see each other. And I want to offer you a new model for thinking about this. It's called the EACH model. Employees as adults, consumers, and human beings. EACH. Employees as adults, consumers, and human beings. And I want to share with you a kind of bit of an explanation, but I also want to share with you practical things that organizations are already doing. And not just the sexy high-tech organizations either. The small startups that are all agile, but increasingly traditional businesses, large-scale businesses, are questioning and starting to do things differently. Now, you won't agree with all of it. You might think some of it is complete rubbish. That's fantastic. We can have a conversation about it. But I want you to just to take a step back and just think about how you deliver HR in your organizations. And maybe is there a different way? So let's have a look at adult. And I'm going to start with a little story. Imagine the scene. It's London. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's snowing. I hadn't been at the BBC very long, and one of my team came to me and said, Lucy, it's snowing. It's time to write the all-staff email. Okay, what all staff email is this? Well, when it's snowing, we write to people, to all our staff, to say, you should think about going home. Okay. Well, they can't look out the window. They can't see that it's snowing. They can't make a judgment for themselves. What happens if we don't write the email? Are they just going to stay there while the snow gets higher and higher and higher, freeze to death? What happens if they're not in the building? What happens for those people who should have left 2 hours ago because they live really far out? And what about the people who only live around the corner, who can make it home so easily? Because anyone who's been in London when it's snowing, it lasts 5 minutes. But we had this view that we should look after our people. We should protect them. We should put up notices in the toilets that say, now wash your hands. Like they don't know to wash their hands. Please hold the banister and the railing when you're going down the stairs. We look after our people. We take care of them. And I'm going to use some horrible gender stereotypes here, but it's like the mum, you know, the little treats like dress down Friday, patronizing, looking after them, indulging them, perhaps doing too much for them. But the assumption is that they can't do it for themselves. They can't think for themselves. They don't have the right levels of judgment. We have to look after them. And then we have the dad. And the dad, sorry guys, but the critical parent. The one that writes all the rules, and if you break any of these rules, then you get fired. And I'm going to sit you down at the end of the year, and I'm going to give you your end of term report, and here's your grade. Parental. For me, our approach to the way we write rules is the equivalent of the anti-theft coat hanger in a hotel. Bear with me. Any of you stayed at this hotel last night? Lovely hotel. You go to the wardrobe, and in the wardrobe are those coat hangers with just the spike sticking up. You know the ones I mean? So these were clearly designed because people were stealing coat hangers. People were stealing coat hangers from hotels, so we have a brainwave in the hotel industry. Let's create a coat hanger that people can't steal or won't want to steal. Brilliant. So the 1% of people who steal coat hangers from hotels are now covered, all right? They can't do that anymore. But the 99% of customers who have no intention of stealing a coat hanger now can't get their clothes in the bloody wardrobe. Frustrating. It's a stupid... And that's our approach to policy development at work. Someone somewhere does something wrong, so let's create some rules and policies to make sure that never, ever happens again. And we pile the rules and the policies, and we make ourselves feel safe. And we say to our chief execs, we're covered. Legally, we're covered. It's all okay. We've got policies. We've got processes. We're all good. And what are we creating? What are we creating? A compliant workforce, but a workforce who is encouraged or even prevented from using their own judgment, from questioning, from challenging, from asking questions, from taking risks. Because actually what we say is that we prize compliance and obedience and passivity more than we do innovation, creativity, taking risks. Now back to the world that Margrethe was describing and the world that I was existing in the BBC and the world that you're all living in right now. That is not going to deliver you the agility, the innovation, the creativity that you need. So what are companies doing? Well, they're starting to move to an adult-to-adult world, a relationship with their people where they back off the rules, the processes, the parenting, and they start to move that relationship to adult. Let's take Netflix. Classic example, expenses policy, do the right thing by Netflix. That's it. That's their expenses policy. Do the right thing by Netflix. And their expense claims went down. A friend of mine, she's an HR director in a manufacturing company, big traditional manufacturing company. And the board said to her, Nikki, we need a dress code policy. And she said, no, I'm not doing one. And they said, no, we really need one. She said, no, I'm not doing it because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to have to police it. And I'm going to have to make decisions about, do you wear shorts? Do you wear jeans? If you can wear jeans, can you have holes in your jeans? And can you wear flip-flops? And she said, and actually, I don't want to be thinking about that because I've got all this other bigger stuff to think about. They said, no, we really want one. We really want a dress code policy. So she came back the next day and she said, there you are. And they still use it to this day. And the dress code policy says, if you get dressed in the morning and you look in the mirror and you have to ask yourself the question, can I get away with this at work? You should change. That's it. That's it. It's genius. It's genius because it says, use your judgment. You work out what's appropriate and what's not. It's not anarchy. It's freedom within a framework. It's about saying, use your judgment. Nordstrom, retail organization in the States. Employee rule handbook. Rule number 1, use good judgment in all situations. Rule number 2, there are no further rules. Use good judgment. And it's not just about policy design. It's also about our processes. Instead of a starting point, which is we don't trust managers to do it properly, so let's create loads of processes that make them do it, instead of saying, actually, we're going to sit you down and do this for you, what about an approach which started from the assumption that our people are decent human beings and actually care about their career and the contribution that they're making? What if we started from that point of view? So look at Adobe and the approach they've taken to performance management. What Adobe does is they don't have managers that come and chase you and sit you down and give you a review. It's up to you. They say, we assume that you're interested in how you're performing and you will seek out feedback from your peers, your colleagues, your staff members, your manager. And if you're not, then we'll be asking a different question. But we're not going to chase you and sit you down and give you a review like a child. Completely different framework. It's not just processes, it's about how we communicate. If you've come across a really great survey, free survey called the Edelman Trust Barometer, comes out every year in January. This year's results, and it looks at trust, it just looks at the one issue of trust. Who do we trust? And it asked the question about leaders. Trust in leaders has never been so low. It hit the lowest point ever. Who do we trust? We trust people like us. In fact, people like us rates as highly as technical and professional experts. Now, if we trust people like us more than we trust leaders, why do we do communication always top down from the leader, with the leader as the source of wisdom and truth? Why don't we use our employees to talk to each other far more? So some examples on this are like use of Glassdoor. Do you know Glassdoor? Have you come across Glassdoor? So really fantastic tool. Lots of companies now are actively encouraging their employees to use Glassdoor. In fact, L'Oreal looks at Glassdoor at the board level instead of looking at the engagement survey results, because they believe it is more valid, it's fresh, it's current. So really thinking about how you're using your own employees and as a source of communication. At the BBC, we had an internal newsletter that was editorially independent of management. It's called Ariel. When I first got there, I said to my team, right, so just let me get this right. I'm spending a huge chunk of my budget on an internal newspaper that can criticize me and everything we're doing. Yeah, that's right. And I said, right, well, that's going. And then I realized it was the one thing that people trusted. Now, we have 6,000 journalists at the BBC, and journalists, by their very nature, dislike management, distrust authority, are very suspicious of anything that comes from the centre. They read this newsletter, and they believed it. We had people at the BBC who had any email that came from internal communications on auto-delete. But they read this newsletter. We have to think differently about how we communicate and who we communicate with. Social media policies. Loads of companies are desperate for their employees to use social media to act as an advocate, to talk about the organization. And yet when you look at their social media policies, it's a wonder any of them would write anything at all, because it's so, you can do this, you can't do that. They're also terrified of getting it wrong and getting sacked, so they don't use it. Look at Intel, Ford, Gap, their policies. Their social media policy says, play nice, use common sense. If you mess it up, apologize and take it down. It's a great book by Paul Zak called The Trust Molecule, and it looks at the impact, if you feel trusted at work, the impact on your productivity, your innovation and creativity, your stress levels, your retention levels. On every measure, people who feel more trusted, treated like an adult, are more likely to perform in the way that we need them to. So this is not just a nice pink and fluffy stuff. This is money, this is good business sense. Adult to adult, not parent-child. Let's look at the second one. How am I doing on time? I'm okay for a bit. I'll speed up a bit. Consumer. So when I was setting up Disruptive HR and I went out looking for all these brilliant examples of fantastic practice that all I needed to do was just go and look at them and learn about them and then steal them and just repackage them and sell them on, I was very disappointed, and I realized that I was going to have to actually do something for myself because there weren't that many examples out there. So I started to think, who else does what we're trying to do? And there is one area that is doing exactly what HR is trying to do, and that is consumer marketing, consumer-focused organizations. They're trying to change behavior, they're trying to change attitudes, they're trying to increase brand loyalty, okay, with their customers, and we're trying to do it with employees, but there are so many parallels, and we can learn so much from them. And they do a couple of things really well that we need to get so much better at in HR. The first one is insight. Now, we've underinvested in our HR systems. We collect data that is bolted onto the finance system. We have an asset register. We know how many we've got, where are they, what are they costing us, what's their shelf life, what type are they, are they a man or a woman? It's an asset register. And we have the annual engagement survey that once a year tells us how our people might be feeling. It takes 6 months to produce this survey. The data is aggregated at such a high level that managers can't relate to it. Now, you think about what consumer organizations know about you. You think about your supermarket loyalty card. You think about Amazon and the algorithms. They know so much about us. They know how we think, how we feel, our behaviors, our patterns. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can hope to get close to that with our employees, but we can develop a level of insight by learning from consumer marketing. The first thing we can learn is that we need to do it more often. Once a year is crazy. Can you imagine a consumer organization like A1 Telecom, going out and asking your customers once a year, and then we're done? We're okay, we're done. We know how they feel this year, guys. We're all right. It's crazy. I like this example. It's a company called Belron. They're not sexy, they're not well known, but they're actually a very profitable, cash-rich organization. They replace windscreens. Their chief exec sends a text message to a sample of their employees once a week, just with one question saying, how is work for you this week? He then can respond to it either individually or it can be done through his weekly newsletter. Timely, effective. Pacey, keeping up with the pace of business. Virgin Trains are also doing amazing work in this area. What they did was that they asked their consumer marketing team to come in and help HR. And they said, if you were looking at our people, our 3,500 people, as if they were consumers, what would you want to know about them? And they wanted to know different things to what HR wanted to know. They wanted to know things like social media preferences and career aspirations. They wanted to profile them. And they came up with 12 Virgin Trains personality types. It's not sophisticated, but it's a damn sight better than most of us have got. And what they do is they now use this profiling, these personality types, to look at changes and approaches to communications, to performance management, and to learning. And this is the second thing that consumer organizations do that we can learn from. They segment their market. They have different pricing policies and different routes to market, and they even have different branding strategies. We've made a virtue in HR about one size fits all. We say we have one global process for performance management, and we're proud of it. In an age when it is all about personalization, when it is all about customization down to the individual level, if you can, HR seems to be going the other way. We can learn so much by customizing and segmenting our approach. I'll give you one example of this because of time. But let's have a look at what Starbucks did. They looked at their employee segments and they came up with 3. And they called them skiers, the guys who work at Starbucks because actually they want to get the money to pursue their other passion, which is skiing. Or other passions, doesn't have to be skiing, but they nicknamed them the skiers. They're only working there for the cash. They don't want to stay there forever. It's just literally so they can go skiing whenever they want. Then they had what they called the artists, and the artists were interested in community and social enterprise and giving back, and that was very important to them. And then the final group was the careerists, and the careerists saw themselves staying with Starbucks, really wanting to get on. And they used these 3 very simple segments to look at how they were going to train, how they were going to support with career development, rather than one size fits all. Consumer techniques. Yeah, I'm going to have to speed up. So, last 5 minutes. Human. Now, I could go on for literally days about how inhuman awful lot of what we do in HR is. You know, it's we kind of come up with these big clunky processes which really bear no resemblance, have shown no recognition of how human beings actually think, feel, behave, communicate, are intrinsically motivated. I could talk about reward. We know that money doesn't motivate. We know that we need to pay people fairly, but actually the additional gains you get from providing money incentives is really not worth it. Certainly not worth the time, the effort, the agony that we go through with our bonus schemes. We could look at learning and how most people's ability to retain information is very, very minimal, and yet our tendency to still put people through training programs when 80% of what they've learned will be forgotten in 30 days. We could talk about how increasingly organizations are moving to micro-training. But we haven't got time to go through every single aspect, so I'm just going to choose one, and it's the one that I think, well, I know because all of our clients are saying, we want to talk about performance management. We want a different approach to performance management. So let's have a look at what we do in performance management that is actually not human, and what are the alternatives. So let's start with objectives. I'm working with a big bank at the moment, working with them about changing their approach to performance management. They set their objectives at a big corporate level in November. We're now in April, and the frontline staff have just had the objectives cascaded down to them. Now, not only is this crazy in a fast-moving world, because actually the original objectives are probably out of date, but also we know that if you get objectives cascaded down to you, the chances are you don't own those, you don't want to do them. If it's a have-to goal, I have to do this, so much less likely to do it than I want to. So we're seeing increasingly organizations getting employees in teams to set their own goals based around a broad sense of what the purpose of the organization is. Not cascaded objectives that are supposedly aligned, which just kills any energy. Let's look at feedback. Did you know that the words, "Can I give you some feedback," has exactly the same impact on the brain as someone running up behind you at night in a dark alley wearing a hoodie? It has the impact on the brain, which is terrifying. We can only change one behavior at a time. Human beings are like that. We are, relatively complex, sophisticated animals, but we can only change one behavior at a time. And then if we get feedback at the time when we're exhibiting the behavior, and subsequently feedback for 6 weeks relentlessly. And yet what do we do with our performance reviews? We see somebody doing something brilliant or not so good, and we say, right, I'm going to make a note of that, and I'll raise it with them in 6 months' time when we have their performance review. We know that human beings cannot actually think and give people a review for a whole year. We're incapable of it. So we give them the feedback on really the last couple of months. Ratings. If you come across the work of David Rock, really worth looking at if you haven't. David Rock, who runs the Neuro Leadership Institute, and he talks about the impact that on human beings of being rated and graded. So some of us, let me just do a quick show of hands. How many of you have an end-of-year rating which is numeric, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? A few of you. And how many of you have moved to phrases like meets expectations? We kid ourselves, don't we? We pretend that, they're not being rated by a number anymore, but everybody knows that that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5. We're kidding ourselves. And as human beings, we hate being put into a box. So the conversation that actually could be about how I'm developing, how I'm improving, where I need to do better becomes all about the number. And am I a 2 or a 3 for communication skills? What a waste of time. No wonder that only 8% of organizations believe that performance management, as it stands today, adds any value. 8%, and yet 92% of us are still doing it. So we're seeing moves to frequent check-ins, really much more fluid, asked for by the employee. And I think, when you said book your boss, is that something similar? Brilliant, brilliant. Because it's about actually, I have a right, I have an expectation, and I have an interest in knowing how I'm doing. Frequent check-ins, changing the language. Hearst Publishing just moved it from performance management reviews to career conversations. Now, I don't think I want a performance review, but I might want a career conversation. That might be quite attractive. We're humans. Why do we not think about how we as human beings behave? How many of you have got children? There's no way you would see your son or daughter doing something that needed addressing and saying, right, I'm just going to write it down and I shall raise it with them in 3 months' time when I have their performance review. You wouldn't line your children up and say, right, you're a 1, you're a 3, and you're a 5. Now go away and be motivated. Just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. I know that I'm critical of HR because I am one. It's my tribe, it's my gang, and every person I've met in HR who has worked for me or with me has been passionate, has worked so hard. But I think we lost our way a bit. And actually, I think if we are able to move to a relationship and a mindset which is about developing adult to adult, bringing a consumer mindset to our employees, and fundamentally human, then the time has never been more exciting. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy Adams. We will have the pleasure to have a so-called Lucy desk during our forthcoming. So are there any immediate questions?
They all want coffee. Oh, there's a lady there.
Microphone. Yes, there is one.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk and for
you.
sharing your experience and your insights. Now, I think you all have us hooked. I'm sure we all are. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what we have to do. But, of course, ideally, we are a strategic partner to our senior management. But sometimes that's not perfectly the case yet. So my question is, how do you actually get senior management, I mean, in terms of sort of your CEO, to also follow this idea and this actually totally different philosophy and approach to HR?
So there's so much in that question. So I would actually argue that I don't think we are a strategic partner to senior management. I think what we're there to do is to create the conditions where people can have the best experience at work. I think we need to move away from the Ulrich approach, which is that we're this kind of strategic business partner and somehow the employees fit into that model. I think ultimately we're there to create the conditions where people can do their very best work. So I think that gives us a different slant with our relationship with senior managers. The second point is I've worked for great managers, rubbish managers, mediocre managers, and no policy or process in the world is going to make a crap manager a good manager. It just isn't. But we design so much of what we do around the poor managers. So it's that lowest common denominator thinking again. So our approach is managers won't have a conversation with their people, so let's design a process that means they have to have a conversation. To be honest, I would just ignore the poor managers and work on moving them out and moving them to a different place. I would focus on those that get it, and I would work with them relentlessly. I would pilot and experiment with them, and this is what we did at the BBC. There's no way I would have done anything in the news division. The news division was 2% turnover, poor managers, they hated everything and everyone. There's no way, heavily unionized, I wouldn't have done anything there. But we experimented in areas of television where there was a manager who showed a bit of curiosity. So go with them. Go with where you've got some energy. And if you've got a board of senior leaders that don't get this, who don't want to get it, who don't see that unless we change our approach and move away from command and control to something that is more agile, then go and get another job, because that organization won't be there in the future.
A big applause and big thank you.
Thank you.